Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us. We're very excited to have this event today. This is Business for Sustainable Future, addressing poverty, creating jobs, and sharing and addressing a just transition. Now, this is part of a series of dialogues that we are doing and getting business on board for the Summit of the Future. But first, the Business and Industry Group is organizing this. And I thank Noreen Kennedy, my co-chair with the Business and Industry Group. But also we're organizing this with UNDP and ILO. As I said, there's a whole team behind this, and an enormous thank you to the IOE team who has been helping us, Dahlia and Emily. Now, just a few housekeeping rules. The panelists, who are numerous and very distinguished group, we would like to make sure that when you are speaking, that you keep your cameras on and the others can take their cameras off when their panel's not speaking. We will be having questions. And so all the people that are in the audience, you're welcome to make in the chat to put in any questions that you might have. We have two panels with introductory remarks, and then our moderators are going to do lots of interactive discussions and questions. So the Pact for the Future, the Zero Draft is out, and we, as business and industry, have put in remarks we'll do at the end of the year. Obviously, the Zero Draft is the first. We're moving us forward on the Summit of the Future. However, and looking at it, I have to say that I don't see an awful lot of reference to the private sector. While we know that the key areas are, governance, peace and security, but under the area of technology and particularly youth as well, we are concerned about the fact that we need to try to get into that text, the critical role that the private sector plays. Now, UNDP and their recent studies have stressed the importance of working with the private sector, given that they create 90% of the jobs. And as we say, if you create a job, you feed a family. However, job creation is so critical, and we need to ensure that if we want to create jobs, the key ways to eradicate poverty, we have to ensure that we are all working together, because giving people a job gives them dignity and self-respect. The ILO, through its new Global Coalition for Justice, is bringing in many ways different partners from the private sector, public sector, different organizations, committing to various areas of social justice in relation to the workplace. We welcome this, and especially stressing what they are saying in the ways of education, reducing informality, safe workplaces, sustainable social protection systems, sustainable growth, and of course, fair globalization. But we're here today because it is the start of the Partnership Forum. And we need to push the 2030 ahead, because as we all know, we are behind and we need all hands on deck. That includes the private sector. I have to say that I'm saying the same thing that I say in many fora. If we want the private sector engaged, we need to make sure that employers and businesses are true partners, and they are at the UN table from ideation to implementation. So our panels today, the objective is really truly to highlight and showcase what employers, businesses, organizations are doing to meet our SDG targets, but really partnering for impact. So we all know we need to do more, but let's see how we can do it together. So I'm excited to hear and introduce our distinguished panelists and how they can ensure that we can move faster, sooner, and we can reach our goals. And obviously ensure that no one is left behind. So now I leave it to our experts to come in. And our first panel, I'd like to introduce Noreen Kennedy. who is the co-chair of the Business and Industry Group with me. And she, like me, has been very busy over the last 3 or 4 years in really trying to bring business to the table. Noreen is the Senior Vice President of the US CIB and the founder of the Moving the Needle initiative. So Noreen, I give you the floor and your panelists. And thank you for joining us, all the panelists.
Okay. Thank you for that nice introduction, Shay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have once again a multi-time zone group, both among our speakers and in the audience. I wanted to just take a minute to say a couple of words about my organization, the United States Council for International Business, before we turn to our panel. USCIB, United States Council for International Business, is the proud American affiliate and employers representative in the International Organization of Employers. We fly the IOE flag with a lot of pride. We're the only US business organization with UN ECOSOC NGO consultative status. And we've represented American business in UN Sustainable Development deliberations since the 1992 Earth Summit. Shay was kind enough to mention our Moving the Needle initiative that provided and continues to provide business recommendations and priorities related to SDGs and our common agenda to last year's SDG Summit, and hopefully again over the course of the year, taking us towards a summit of the future. And yes, it is an honor to co-chair the Business and Industry Major Group with Shay. She is a terrific colleague and diplomat for the business community. We regard the Summit of the Future as a turning point for practical, underline practical, inclusive multilateralism. In our view, strengthened international cooperation depends on scaling positive change via long-term partnerships with business, something which we very much hope to see advanced during this year's Partnership Forum. Let's turn now to the subject of the panel and to SDG 1, on poverty eradication, which is one of the focus areas this year for the SDG work cycle, and in particular, the role of decent jobs linked to a just transition. Sometimes the fundamentals are hiding in plain sight and taken for granted. By this, I mean the essential role of business and employers in providing jobs and livelihoods. This certainly has been a recurring topic. It was a primary focus at the Private Sector Forum of LDC 5 last year and is among the 6 transitions recognized by the SDG Summit. But I think we will find, and we'll hear from our panel now, that this perennial topic is indeed a very dynamic one, with positive change being driven by employers. So we have 3 terrific speakers, one of whom may be running a little bit late. So I'm going to introduce, first of all, Ms. Bettina Schaller, who is joining us from the ADECO Group, where she is a senior vice president. Bettina, I think it's not an overstatement to call you a thought leader in this world of just transition and sustainable livelihoods for the business community. And we know that you have been a thought leader both in employers federations, but also in the Business and Industry Advisory Committee to the OECD, which is another affiliation we have. So Bettina, thanks for joining us. Our second speaker will be Saru Duckworth. Ms. Duckworth is a researcher and development practitioner. She's currently pursuing her master's in development practice at Columbia University, but she is really an up-and-comer. She is a UN Foundation Next Generation Fellow and a research assistant in the office of the eminent Joseph Stiglitz. She is focusing her work in women's empowerment and in sustainable livelihood initiatives for women in extreme poverty. She's received several awards, including the US President's Volunteer Service Award, and has been a US Department of State Fulbright Scholar. So quite substantial, and we will certainly be hearing a lot from her in the future. And I do not see that our third speaker has joined us yet, so perhaps we might begin.
I'm here.
Marcos, perfect
I'm here,
timing.
Corinne. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
And I'm so sorry that I'm late, but I'm here right on time.
No, perfect timing, Marcos. Very good. And so nice of you to come and bring gender balance to our panel. And not just only gender balance, but tremendous intellect and experience. Marcos is UN Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Assistant Administrator and Director of the Bureau for Policy and Program Support. He has been in previous roles the Director of UNDP's Sustainable Finance Hub. He's been ahead of the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group's Secretariat and co-chaired executive boards of the Business Call to Action and Connecting Business Initiative. He's had a lot of experience in the UN community, and I don't think it's an overstatement to say that he's kind of a household word for the UN New York community. So Marcos, thanks for joining us. So the way the panel will be organized is I'm going to be asking each of our speakers to begin with a 3-minute intervention, speaking to this question, which I think you have received in advance, and that is to get your perspective on your organization and your own professional experience on where we see bottlenecks in creating more sustainable and decent jobs. I think that, this is a key topic, as I said in my introductory remarks. We kind of take it for granted. We think it's the same old, and yet this is one of the most fundamental and indeed potentially revolutionary areas where the business community working with other stakeholders, and notably the UN community, can really make the change that we need to see. So Bettina, if I may, I'm going to call on you in the order that you were introduced. So Bettina, I'm going to give you the floor first. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Noreen, and also Shay and everybody involved in bringing this business community together in the context of the Summit of the Future that is ahead in the course of this year. And what an exciting year we have ahead, don't we? The ADECO group that I represent today has been active in the space of business engagement from the lens of labor market policy. And we are no strangers to a process like the one that is triggered these days, because we had the honor and pleasure to be part of the process around the future of work centenary of the International Labour Organization in 2019, where, of course, a ILO Global Commission on the Future of Work was created, and back then a report was drafted as well. And again, we as the ADECO group were one of the very few business representatives who were involved there. Now, I don't need to preach to the converted on this call, but I can only say how eminently important it is for employers, for businesses to be part of the process and to feed in those direct examples. Now, you set up the question with the bottleneck discussion, and in a way, the job creation topic, of course, has been around for years and years. The way you frame it brings in the novelty of these days, which is job creation absolutely necessary and required due to that double transition that we see happening, the green transition and the digital transition. But in a way, the instruments for job creation, of course, remain the same. Having said that, when we look at the bottlenecks from our perspective, we very often see that it has to do, well, with the way that the labor markets themselves are built, with the structure that they have in terms of the contracts that labor markets offer. And so, again, if I'm very precise and put my finger on a bottleneck, then it's in me as an employer not having all the contractual forms at my disposal that I may want to apply and I may want to use to create jobs and to bring people into the labor market. And I want to be clear here that all of those diverse forms of contract that we are asking for are by definition have to be and are decent. And of course, there's an element of sustainability to it. Let me just finish with the second bottleneck that we see, and that is actually on the supply side of labor. That is on the side of the actual talent pool that we see today. And that might be a contradiction because, of course, in many countries, there are still too many people who are unemployed. But there are also an incredible amount of jobs, again, that are available, notably in that new digital and green space, but we don't have the people. And so that talent supply piece, that pool of green talent, of digital talent, is something that we advocate for heavily, and that no doubt I will be able to touch on later on as well. But let me leave it here, Noreen, and hand it back to you.
Thanks, Bettina. And I think that the point about the double transition is such a key one. And it will help really take us to our second point of discussion with regard to what the opportunities might be like. And I think your perspective, coming from, one of the leading, if not the leading company when it comes to workforce issues, and the opportunities for scale, and yet still the challenges that you are facing. And again, every challenge is an opportunity, hopefully, when we turn it around and look at it from, its side as a kind of a signal for where we need to put resources. So thanks for those comments. I'd like to turn now to Saru. Saru, thank you for joining us. And I would pose the same question to you, especially based on the work you've already been doing in key regions and with stakeholder communities that might not be reached by a large company like Adecco. And what do you see, and what have your findings been with respect to bottlenecks linked to creating sustainable and more decent jobs?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to echo the thanks to IOE, to all the co-organizers. So I work primarily in my role as a fellow. I work with young people all over the world who are collaborating. They're social entrepreneurs that are working on SDGs 1 and 8 for decent work and no poverty, SDG 1. And I was part of an engine room that was hosted by UN Foundation this year that mobilized 44,000 young people for the SDG Summit. And I think that's something we absolutely hope to do again for the Summit of the Future, recognizing, we need to be future and forward-looking in everything we do, and young people have to be a part of that conversation, especially the conversation about where the jobs of the future come from and how we prepare for them. Because I think that the primary bottleneck that I've seen this year is how rapidly skills and workplaces are evolving for everyone. I can't keep track of it myself as a student, especially young people around the world who make up half of the world's population. It's disorienting. We were in Chile actually last week with Shay of the IOE, and she made a great point. We were at a conference on the future of work with the UN ECOSOC, and she made a great point that companies are reporting that the skills of today will only be relevant for the next 3 years, which is staggering when you think about how many young people are out of school right now. Over half of Africa's population is out of school. It hits, predominantly women who also have extraordinary purchasing power in their lifetimes, even if they're living close to the poverty line. So we need to be doing something to bridge that gap, to unlock the potential of those people too, recognizing it's an investment, right? It's an investment in bringing more people into the workforce and more people into, a consumer base. And we really need to be better, I think, at working with young people, reaching them where they are if they're out of school, and working intergenerationally, promoting intergenerational knowledge and skill exchange. That's one of the most powerful and I think underutilized tools that we have, because it benefits not just young workers, it benefits all workers, truly, when you design mentorship programs, apprenticeship programs, dual education, worker systems, so that there's really two-way learning between older and younger workers, enabling all workers to upskill at the same time. And I think we need a few simple formulas that networks like this can really help promote. Any company can put in place, no matter their size, and tailor really to their needs and the needs of their workforce. So this is where, private sector partners, networks can be really, really valuable to help share those best practices, help smaller actors do this. What's incredible about some of the models that we know work for young people in order to bring those who are excluded from education systems and work systems into the labor market, like apprenticeship models, is that they're really not one size fits all. They can actually be tailored very specifically to context, to include certain kinds of very marginalized or hard to reach groups. Again, recognizing that, these people have incredible potential, and once, unlocked through again, that intergenerational knowledge sharing and really just a belief in their potential, that, this has lifelong effects, life cycle effects for them, for companies, for their societies. I would just also note that, we need the civil society actors involved in this process and local assessments when we are designing these programs, recognizing, a really successful apprenticeship model in South Asia for young people will not necessarily translate to Africa, where there's very different, social attitudes, histories around different kinds of work. And so we need to be sensitive to those kinds of contextual differences, and I guess really work with the young people in those areas. And that's why, my network, the young people in our engine room are really happy to be a partner of private sector actors who are trying to figure out how do we do this. And I'll just end and say that I think that some of the most transformative impacts also come when we empower young people to design and lead these programs themselves within our workplaces. Youth training, mentorship programs, affinity groups for young people in the workplace. We know how important peer networks can be for our workplace productivity, our well-being, and it's not just a nice to have anymore for young people. We continue to see it's really critical for our work. So these principles, intergenerational learning, context-based approaches to reach those outside of our systems, and also putting young people in the driver's seat where we can to lead the way in the workplace. I think all of these can benefit all workers, all kinds of companies, and also those being left behind.
Noreen, can I torpedo the protocol and make a comment straight away? There goes your
quick comment. Yeah, please go ahead, Bettina.
So many things, Saru, obviously I could underline immediately, and those who know me know that we're one of the biggest advocates for apprenticeships and work readiness. But I wanted to pick up your comment on, because we also always say, right, how obsolete the skills will be in 3 years or 4 years down the road. And I think it's time that we differentiate on that one, because yes, that might very well be the ominous technical skills, right? But those soft skills, the human skills, those will not be obsolete in 3 to 4 years. At the contrary. And we all know that as employers and as organizations in the workforce space, we are starting to put more and more emphasis on those. And I was just in Davos at the World Economic Forum annual meeting, where Adam Grant, who's a big thinker in that space, put forward the 3 skills for 2024. So I'm going to share this as well, Noreen. He said generosity, humility, and proactivity. So I know we have a lot of those already on our lists, but I'd like to just everybody also to start to move into that type of skills, right, that will be needed as we move forward and build that future for all of us and create those jobs, because those skills are going to be needed there as well. Thank you, Noreen.
Thanks, Bettina. And I think it was worth the short stop, as we say in American English. But the really, my takeaway from what I've heard from both of you is, first of all, that we need, as Saru called it, intergenerational. I don't know if I necessarily would think of it that way, but a multi-stakeholder sharing of good practice. And when I think of where all of these roads converge, it is very much at the door of UNDP. Marcos, let me ask you the question, and especially given the really kind of proactive and out-of-the-box thinking that UNDP is known for, and that I think you are one of the pioneers for. how do you see the bottlenecks, and how do we start to chip away at them when it comes to creating more sustainable and decent jobs in the current frame that we find ourselves in?
Thank you, Noreen, and great to be here with all of us. And I think the three, generosity, humility, and proactivity, are a key element of that for the formal job market and from the informal job market, because I think it is important to realize here that, we're still 4 years after the pandemic, and a word in people in nearly 30% of developing economies remain poorer than before the pandemic, right? And if current projections hold, an estimated 7% of the global population will still be living in extremely poverty by the end of this decade, by the end of the SDGs. Now, there's no doubt about it, the job is perhaps the most satisfying aspect and the best way to get out of poverty in a long-term period, right? But it's not the only one. And in today's world, especially developing countries with informal economy and elements like that, we need to have a dual approach in that sense. Now, we also know that creating jobs is foremost in the minds of governments around the world. In preparation for the SDG Summit, we conducted what we call the SDG Insights Report, and we can put the link here in the chat. And in 79 out of the 93 countries that we produced these insights, creating jobs was the number one priority from governments. Now, the problem was it was about creating jobs at all costs in every aspect. It was about economic growth, not, doesn't matter if it's on the dirty side. So what we learned from these reports is we are getting the development that we can rather than development that we wish. The development that we wish is the development that is this transition to a just, and green economy. An emphasis on the just as well as the green, right? And I think the point of not only creating jobs, but having contracts and salaries that pay, in some places the minimum wage, in some places the living wage, becomes very important on that just side. I think the issue of capacity building becomes very important because as you decarbonize and transitions the economy, there will be losers. The question is, what do we do with that losers, right? How do we quicker than in the past, when we had global economic transitions, with the digital and with the green side, how do we quickly reskill not only the technical sides, but on the three soft sides that have been mentioned, this element, right? Because what we believe is that we know the kind of development economic growth the world needs and wants, and that young people wants above all, which is a green and just that reduces inequality, that addresses the climate crisis. And for that, we need the right policies in place. We need to shift subsidies and incentives towards that economy rather than current economy, right? And we need to support, with capacity building in a permanent way, the transition from that. My last comment, I think, on this would be to say that if you look away from the formal job creation, the startup universe, which is very attractive to young people, continent like Africa, huge demographic element to be capitalized, right? We've just launched in Davos as well, a comprehensive African-wide attempt, right, to bring $1 billion into a startup ecosystem with universities, with apprenticeships, with companies. It's called Timbuktu, right? And I think that is one of the examples that we can see moving beyond Africa and other aspects, which tries to complement the push on job creation here, right? With a push to make use of the digital, to make use of the connectivity of young people, right? Who are interested in that element. That, you know, it's going to be very difficult to convince somebody young right now to become a carpenter, right? Even though it's a good job, when with the connectivity with the digital. So how do you actually invest on the elements of startup? I think it becomes very important. It's also something that UNDP is in the forefront or try to bring together with, you know, and if you combine the two aspects, is what we call a structured transformation of society, of the global economy. We don't have time to be talking about small little projects here. We've got to transform the entire economy, right? And that's where I end by saying cannot, will not be done without the private sector. Governments alone cannot do it. Civil society alone cannot do it. We need the private sector. Without the private sector, you cannot move entire economies to a decarbonized, inclusive, poverty alleviating, fighting climate, digital basis that keep creating the capabilities for the future. Thanks, Nareen.
Thanks, Marcos. And as you say, time is not always on our side, and we have to do more, and we have to really put our foot on the accelerator pedal, including in our panel, unfortunately. I would also note that on the day of the Partnership Forum, one of the things that I really appreciate about the Partnership Forum is that we hear examples, that we hear cases. And you just gave us one excellent case or one example where we are actually taking steps towards that transition towards greener and bluer types of livelihoods. To close us out, we're going to do a speed round, and I'd like to start with Bettina, then Saru, then Marcos. Could you give me one example that either you've been involved in or that you have been observing from afar that really highlights the potential for impact in bringing together employers with other stakeholders to really move the future of work and actually even the present of work in the direction that we know it needs to go so urgently? So Bettina, you're up to bat first. Over to you.
Thank you, Noreen. Thank you. And I've thought about this hard because we have so many actually, and I'm so proud of it. And I've elected one example that I want to share because why? It touches the that green skill space, and it touches the need to work together between all stakeholders. And it's a training program that we have developed now specific to France, where we are training elected officials of rural communities on developing public policies that include the ecological and the green aspect. So it's really about obviously changing the internal rules and regulations, looking at the public procurement process from the lens, working with the communities of the rural communes. And it's all about just raising the awareness and giving the tools so that that green transition that needs to happen and that needs to lead to job creation is something that the policymakers themselves have knowledge of and are then aware to, together with the partners again, act on. And so this is a training program that, as I said, we have developed and we have seen has yielded wonderful results for France. You're on mute, Noreen.
Wonderful, yeah. Yes, wonderful example. Saru, your idea for a case that we can take with us into today's Partnership Forum.
Yeah, I would point to the example, I mean, there's many, many examples that have come out of Generation Unlimited, right? Which is one of the largest public-private partnerships that's really working really smartly for young people on those kinds of scalable, big push kind of investments that would really change the landscape of work for people being left out, both at the global level, right? Unlocking financing, I think, is really key, but at the local level as well. One of the most sort of important things I think they've done is think really critically about market access for young people and digital connectivity access. And so they've really made smart investment cases that they can bring to the private sector and say, look, this is where you would get the most bang for your buck from connecting every school in this area to internet. And here are, a huge portion of the labor market that you could immediately tap into if they had digital access and skills. So those kinds of partnerships. One other that I would point to that's actually going to be launched in advance of the Summit of the Future, but really kind of come to fruition at the Summit of the Future, is a funders collective that UN Foundation is putting together with some of the largest youth-focused organizations to get funding directly to young entrepreneurs. Sorry, I'm having technical issues, but yeah, having financing directly reach young entrepreneurs so that they can start to scale these ideas that, we're hearing every day that are coming from them, from their communities. Those two.
Thanks, Saru. And Marcos, I'm giving you the last very rapid word so that we can pass on to our next panel, which will be discussing solutions and partnerships. But from your perspective, is there another noteworthy example that you'd like to share with us?
Very, very quickly, I'll give you two. One, our work with Microsoft in Asia Pacific. We are reaching 2 million youth from underserved, underrepresented, and digital excluded communities with AI fluence and skills for future development. And second, the notion of reskilling young and women people in our Green Growth and Job Accelerator program running in Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and Jordan, which aim to support 800 SMEs in creating directly jobs for women and youth in that transition element. And just before I leave, I want to thank the partnership here with ILO and IOE on this. Thank you, Nareen. It's good to see you after so long.
Yeah, thank you, Marcos. Thank you, Bettina. Thank you, Saru. That was a very rich discussion. I'm going to pass the floor back to Shay and look forward to the next panel.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So we go from human skills to informality, just green transition, SMEs, all such critical points. Now, that we have a great panel coming up, a little bit of competition now. I have to say that first panel was actually really great. I'd like to introduce our moderator, the Senior Regional Coordination Officer for the Regional Office of Asia and the Pacific. She is the mastermind lady working in Asia for all the RCs and particularly the regional advisor on all RCs in Asia. Sarwat, you have the floor and we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Shreya, and Swadika from Bangkok. And what an honor it is to be joining all of you and continuing the discussion that Noreen just initiated with all of us. But first of all, congratulations are definitely in order to you, Shreya, especially on the launch of the playbook. And I specifically mentioned the playbook because to me, that is an excellent compilation of the examples of partnerships at the country level, where the resident coordinators have partnered with employer organizations and the private sector to very much address the priorities of how do we bridge the gap created in skills, in digitalization, within the gambit of its huge advancements and benefits that it offers. Now, we heard from Noreen's panel on the bottlenecks, and we also heard some solutions. So my session will focus on the partnerships, very much focusing also on how do we prioritize the most vulnerable. We heard from the first panel, young people, women who will also be disadvantaged by some of the technological advancements too. So how do we work together to really prioritize the needs of those who are most vulnerable? Now, to do so, what an honor it is for me to be joined by a powerhouse of experts and erudites. So my first panelist is going to be Celeste Drake, who is the newly appointed ILO Deputy Director General, and she brings a wealth of experience as a policy advisor and holding degrees in political science, public policy, and law from UCLA. She recently served as the Deputy Director of the National Economic Council under President Biden. And in this role, she played a key part in implementing infrastructure and clean energy investments. So with a background as the trade and globalization policy specialist, she also advocated for inclusive growth and shared prosperity for workers through policy reforms. And lastly, her Capitol Hill experience, specializing in labor, trade, education, and health policies, very much enhances this extensive career as well. My second panelist is another powerhouse, Adaku Oferi. She's an award-winning energy attorney and climate leader, and is recognized for her impactful contributions to sustainable energy in the sub-Saharan Africa. Pioneering climate-focused policies and regulatory reform. She accelerated green investments and promotes very much the renewable energy across 23 countries in Western and Central Africa. And then last but not least, we have our gender balance equalizer, Dr. Jose Medina Mora Ecaza, who is the president of Copamarmex, that leads a confederation representing over 36,000 Mexican companies and contributes to 30% of to the GDP and supports 4.8 million formal jobs. And they collaborate with local authorities on legislation, regulations, investments, and business support. Additionally, he's also the founder and chairman of Compu Soluzioni, and pardon my Espanol, as clearly it's not up to the mark, which is a tech solutions integrator. So let me pass the floor immediately to Celeste, and you know, candidly share with us, you know, what in your opinion are some good examples of, you know, and best practices on partnerships that very much prioritize the most vulnerable in this decent work agenda, connecting it to social justice. The floor is yours, Celeste, and you know the drill. 3 minutes for each one of you. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sarat, for that kind introduction. And that last panel is going to be really hard to follow. But this really is a critical discussion about the role that business plays in addressing poverty, creating jobs, and ensuring a just transition. And in particular, and I think Shade laid this out really well, but knowing that we're really stuck on some of our most important sustainable development goals, particularly SDG 1 on poverty reduction and SDG 8 on decent work, we've got to foster a just transition for all and a real pathway out of poverty. And some of the things that we have been doing at the ILO really focus on that population that you just mentioned, the most vulnerable. We've got currently a staggering 214 million workers, people with jobs around the world, living in extreme poverty. And that means less than $1.90 US per day. And we've also got about 400 million who are working with absolutely no social protections in the informal sector. And as we work to increase formality, including through a recently developed action program at the ILO to move folks from informal jobs, whether in the informal sector or maybe the formal sector, but informal jobs, to do that, we will ensure that they can have social protections that provide that floor and that stability so that they have the ability to go from perhaps job to better job or job to entrepreneur and growing the ranks of businesses. We know that sustainable micro, small, and medium enterprises create the most jobs around the world. So the first thing we need to do is build sustainable enterprises. And we are working to do that and have evidence that up to 100 million jobs can be created through decarbonization and circularity measures by 2030. But the shift also, as folks have mentioned, involves job losses, skills gaps, risk that the most vulnerable will be left behind, including not just youth who are currently locked out of labor markets in many countries, but women, people with disabilities, other excluded groups. And that brings me to point 2, just transition. So we need to build sustainable enterprises, and we need to do so justly. And we have a just transition program approved by the ILO governing body. And that means approved by workers, employers, and governments to set out a pathway to build these environmentally sustainable economies that create decent work opportunities. And really the goal is to maximize this opportunity for climate and environmental action, creating the sustainable business environment, and making sure that we see businesses not merely as economic entities, but active agents of positive change that can contribute to the broader social fabric, building this virtuous cycle of sustainable growth and shared prosperity. So I really look forward to the conversation and talking more about how the ILO can contribute. And essentially, it's going to come back to every time a focus on social dialogue, bringing the parties, workers, employers, and governments to the table, and making sure that they can work together to find solutions that work for all. Thanks.
Fantastic, Celeste. And in fact, when I was listening to you and you talked about SDG 1, because I'm in Asia Pacific, obviously I'm going to make more reference to Asia Pacific, but in Asia Pacific, the problem is even more dire, because we've got SDG 13 on climate action that is regressing. We've got SDG 5 on gender equality that is also regressing, and half of the data is not even available to measure the indicators. And the conversation on disability inclusion and bearing in mind these the vulnerable groups that will be most affected by it reminds me of a conversation I recently had on this. And somebody said to me, well, just transition to us is like, you're telling us, sorry, you're losing your job today, but don't worry, in 5 years, you'll get a better job. But what do they do whilst waiting for that? And I think that conversation, that's something that I'm very happy to hear that ILO is taking very seriously. And I would love to hear Adaku's views now on from her experience working in West Africa. What is your experience? What do you feel are some of the solutions that we can address these the vulnerabilities of the most vulnerable?
Right. Thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon. Many thanks to the ILO, IOE, and the UN for convening everyone here today for this important discussion. My name is Adaku Ufere, and I'm the Chief of Party for the USAID and Power Africa West Africa Energy Program implemented by Deloitte Consulting in Accra, Ghana. So good afternoon from West Africa. The West Africa Energy Program is a 5-year Power Africa initiative which aims to expand supply of and access to affordable and reliable grid-connected electricity services across 23 countries in West Africa. So today, I will be sharing insights from my professional journey, both as a USAID contractor on ground in West Africa and as a consultant with Deloitte Consulting. And Deloitte, through several social impact programs, spends time and resources on poverty eradication. I will be underscoring, I'll be underscoring the critical role that businesses can play in forging a sustainable future. And this is one that addresses poverty, creates jobs, and ensures a just transition for all. Now, you mentioned solutions, and I know we're going to expand on that, later in the discussion, but the solutions are clear. Inclusive labor policies, social protection policies, data and information, skills mapping, public-private partnerships, monitoring and evaluation, investment in small businesses, capacity building programs. a lot of which we're already doing, but somehow it's not seeming to make a dent in the problem. And a just transition, let me come back to that because that's my area of expertise, which is a theme central to our discussion today, emphasizes the need to navigate the shift towards sustainability while leaving no one behind. And businesses have a pivotal role in ensuring that this transition is not only environmentally sound, but socially equitable. So in the realm of the energy sector, my work with USAID and Power Africa has reinforced the transformative potential of strategic partnerships between the public and private sector. I mean, Power Africa is the largest public-private partnership in the world. And knowing that access to reliable and sustainable energy is not merely an industry imperative, it's not a luxury, it is a catalyst for social and economic progress. So investing in clean energy solutions and fostering innovation is how businesses can uplift communities and break the shackles of poverty. Now, job creation does stand, and we said that throughout this whole session, job creation stands at the heart of sustainable development, and businesses are the engines that drive economic growth. Deloitte has done several programs designed to drive impact in communities and in society through its world-class 100 million pledge. Deloitte encourages job creation. Power Africa has provided 33,000 hours of training to 2,000 individuals with a focus on women. So you can see private sector, public sector, everyone has identified this as a problem required to be fixed. So in conclusion, as we embark on this collective journey to a sustainable future, let us recognize that the business community is not just a stakeholder, but a driving force for positive change. So by aligning all our strategies with the SDGs, we can harness the immense potential of the private sector, as well as the public sector, to propel us towards a world that is more prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable for generations to come. Thank you. So looking forward to the discussion as we go along.
Fantastic, Adaku, and I mean you've eloquently summarized the importance of the public-private partnerships, and we'll come to that in a minute. But before that, let's hear from Dr. Jose. Dr. Jose, the floor is yours. What are your views? You're on mute.
Thank you, everybody. I would start by saying that we need to work together. The private sector is and will continue to focus on creating job opportunities, promote social inclusion and economic development. This means increase greener, bluer jobs, a just transition with the requisite training to transition into these new jobs. However, we need to work in partnership with our social partners and the government to ensure we have good data, information, and legal frameworks. At Coparmex in Mexico, and also in Latin America, we are working in a model which is called the Inclusive Development Model. This means that the economic development is needed, but not sufficient. It has to go in hand with social development and sustainable development. Of course, this inclusive development model calls for rule of law, ethics and integrity, peace and justice, democracy, freedom. But we're also working on viewing companies as a vehicle of change so that we can work on these multi-poverty categories so that we can work within the companies to have a better countries. But what do employers need as with policies and regulation? Well, we need at the national level to establish effective and efficient public policies, services, and governance. We also need to create an enabling environment for businesses that foster entrepreneurship, which is very important, job creation, economic development, sustainable development, trade, and market openness. We also pursue comprehensive and innovative strategies to understand informality and to promote the transition to the formal economy. Also, we need to increase efforts to untap the potential of digitalization for all. At the international level, we need to enhance international solidarity and multilateralism. Yesterday, the IOE launched a playbook with the Konrad Adenauer and the United Nations DCO on creating synergies between UN resident coordinators and employers for sustainable impact. We know if we want advance on the SDGs, and particularly SDG 8, decent work with the requisite policy frameworks, we need our partners to understand our needs, trust us, and work together from the idea to implementation. I will give some examples of what we're doing in Mexico in the next minutes. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. I'm looking at Dalia because we, panel one, even though they were excellent, they did run over time. So I just wanted to know how much time have we got? So Dalia, do we have, how much time have we got? Because I know that we've got to give Arm the floor as well, who is going to do justice in summarizing the key takeaways.
We have 10 minutes, 9 minutes Fantastic. To go before closing.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got some time. We don't see any questions in the panel. So I will then take the liberty of continuing the conversation that we were having, really looking at you know, the vulnerable groups. And when I talk about vulnerability, it's also geographical vulnerability, you know, the North-South divide. And I think that also needs to be recognized in the mix of when we are proposing solutions and building the necessary coalitions in each of the of our countries, because I think that tailor-made solution is going to be key in really bringing about the transition dividend, if I am to customize the word demographic dividend. So let me go back to Celeste and just share with us, you know, some concrete examples of how we can land this in a just way. How can we land the just transitions in a just way that delivers for vulnerable groups, but also vulnerabilities of geographical locations too?
Thanks for that question, Sarwat. And I think part of it, Shay talked about in the opening statement, is that a lot of this comes back to investment, investing in the future, education and training, investing in growing that sustainable enterprise sector and making sure that it is attractive to invest in upskilling workers in more sustainable enterprises. And as the Secretary General put it in our common agenda, really building that global solidarity. We are in a global community, and countries that are only investing, particularly developed countries that are only investing in themselves, aren't really investing in the future because we are all in this together. So one of the things that the ILO is doing is our new Global Coalition for Social Justice, which Shay also mentioned. This is really a key initiative for Director General Gilbert Hongbo, and it is really taking the most of the private sector, workers and employers organizations, our member states, other UN agencies and institutions, and saying, how can we promote additional action and work together to collaborate to do things that are in our national interests or in the agency's expertise, but in a way that really capitalizes on synergies and advances social justice, because we cannot have lasting peace without social justice, which means an inclusive economy where everyone can see themselves. So when you say people are afraid of a transition because there's some break, how do you develop those transitions so that you have invested correctly, so that there isn't a 5-year break? There is an investment in new jobs, in new quality jobs, in the training and education needed for workers to step into those jobs and be productive right away. And so that entrepreneurs can see business opportunities for themselves in that greener future. If folks look around and see what you said, well, nothing, and maybe a job will materialize in 5 years, there won't be a transition because people will fight it. They can't see themselves. So it's how do you build that program that meets people where they are? And maybe it's an intersectional place of a woman with a disability or a youth who is from an excluded group, and making sure that you're speaking to all of those and that your policies really make it so that it can't succeed without the inclusion of all.
Thanks, Celestia. And I really, really like the fact that you brought in intersectionalities of vulnerability. So we know that it's not just disability on its own. I mean, disability inclusion is something that's quite close to my heart. So you'll hear me say this quite a bit. But you know, it's not just disability on its own. It's disability intersecting with so many vulnerabilities in a crisis situation and in a climate vulnerable location so let me pass it on now to Adaku in the interest of time, and maybe share with us some really good examples of the private sector engagement that especially Deloitte is engaged in.
Right, thank you very much. So as Chief of Party for the West Africa Energy Program, I oversee 23 countries in West and Central Africa. And that region has some of the most fragile and insecure countries in the world. They've greatly suffered the impact of climate change and political instability, unemployment, low electrification rates. So this is all to say that for West Africa, the decent work agenda is not just a human, literally mean life or death. So like I said earlier, solutions, they seem very easy and simple to say. Make sure labor policies are inclusive, make sure there's social protection policies. But then how do you implement that, not just give it lip service? So you're making sure you are gathering data and information for informed decision-making. You're making sure there's skills mapping to facilitate effective skills development programs. And with what Deloitte is doing in that realm, Deloitte has a 100 million pledge to empower 100 million people. And with regards to equipping vulnerable workers for decent work, under the 100 million pledge, we have a CARE initiative that has a goal to increase the employability of refugees, which is that often, I think people think of refugees in the sense of giving charity, giving aid, but not necessarily giving work. So Deloitte has committed to increase their employability through business acceleration, through mentorship, sponsorship, integration events, co-creation with other companies. Recently, Deloitte Care worked with 2 Syrian refugees in Switzerland to land jobs and entrepreneurship opportunities. Now that is a prime example of businesses promoting the shared value of utilizing profit for social impact. I'd also mentioned earlier about how Power Africa is the largest public-private partnership in the world. I think we've surpassed about $50 billion in investment mobilized to grow the energy sector and bring electricity to millions in sub-Saharan Africa. And energy being the linchpin for other aspects of development. So with energy as a foundation, you're affecting health, affecting education, you're affecting, water, everything, sanitation. And so we have to start with partnerships, because social impact cannot be a task for the private sector alone. We need to foster collaboration between governments, between business, civil society, to create this conducive environment for decent work. Public-private partnerships can leverage resources and expertise that will implement effective solutions. And once you have that in place, then you can start facilitating access to microfinance, entrepreneurship support for vulnerable groups, implementing capacity building, and then just to make sure those measures are adequately tracked, ensuring proper monitoring and evaluation. We tend to forget that we need to be able to assess the impact. Crucial to conduct regular impact assessments of policies and initiatives to ensure they're effectively addressing these needs, and then using feedback mechanisms to make continuous improvement. And then you underscore that with advocacy and awareness, social justice campaigns. Just so by addressing these elements, you can contribute to a comprehensive and effective approach to advancing the decent work agenda, and not just making sure you're covering it in a broad and holistic way in alignment with social justice principles.
Thank you so much, Adaku. And Arm and Shea have put their videos on, which is a clear signal that we're running out of time. So Jose, very quickly over to you, and then we will give it back to Shay and Arm to do justice in summarizing not just our panel, but the first panel and the key takeaways from the session. Over to you, Jose.
Yeah, thank you. One example on what a company can do for creating these decent jobs is there's an agency in Mexico, Coneval, that says that workers, employees that left the formal education in order to get into the job, they will not get formal education, but in 3 generations. So it will not be them or their children, but their grandchildren. So what we are doing is inviting companies to invest in giving the time and tools so that employees can complete their formal education meanwhile they're working for the companies, so that we can close that gap in just 1 generation. This is an example we are doing now in Mexico with tremendous success, because if they complete formal education, they will have the training for better jobs, for decent jobs. So this is how companies can put this effort in creating these better jobs, these decent jobs.
Excellent. And it very much speaks to Saru's point on the intergenerational solutions that she had put forward as well. So we were already seeing synergies between both panels. Shreya, over to you. And thank you so much for the honor of allowing me to moderate this session. Over to you. And to my guests and to my panelists too. Sorry, I should have acknowledged my panelists. So huge thanks to each one of you. Over to you now, Shreya, for sure.
Well, thank you, Sarat, and the panelists. That yet again an excellent discussion. And so many solutions which are really impacting people's lives. It's so great to see when we work together, we really can move the needle. So I'm now going to pass it over to Arm, our colleague in Bangkok, who is with the Brandy Company, who is going to do a little bit of a summary, and I think he has a slide for us. And then we're all going to get our taxis and run down to the UN. So thank you very much to everyone and to the panelists, and we'll be sending out the recording as well as the slides to everyone probably tomorrow. Thank you. Arm, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Shay, and thanks to all of the esteemed speakers for the insights you have shared today. I'm glad to be here and glad to see Thai colleagues coming on the floor as well. So I would put it in this way, whether it will be eradicating poverty, creating decent jobs, or driving a just transition. I think what you all have shared has perfectly underscored the importance of having the private sector in the front seat of driving toward a sustainable future through the global economy. The question now is not just how, but it is about shifting to a goal-oriented how, because we need to finish it as we expect. Therefore, to wrap up, I would like to share my perspective on how businesses yearn for and how businesses can lead the entire ecosystem to become a strategic fit for the future. So to come back to identifying the shared values between what businesses yearn for and what they need to contribute. The ecosystem can be categorized into 3 levels. So let's start from the economy. With multiple crises, including geopolitical confrontations and critical climate change, the role of public sector as the regulator is no longer valid. To convene an effective solution toward a sustainable future in terms of both speed and scale. Now, businesses are calling for a new mechanism at the governmental level and intergovernmental level to holistically create economic growth while bettering society and environment. It is a mechanism that helps outline an interdependent relationship between the public and the private sectors, where government is open to listening and acts as the facilitator for business to create inclusive growth. Undoubtedly, the problems concerning poverty eradication, job creation, and ensuring a just transition deserve high priority. However, governments around the world need to join hands more than ever and create a system that encourages not only wealth creation, but also wealth distribution. When the public sector steps into play, together with global support, countries, especially developing and least developed country ones, will be unchained from widening inequality gap between the famous 1% and the other 99%. Establish a robust human capital with the future-ready skills and high financial literacy, be able to enjoy sustainable progress amid any future uncertainty. Moreover, state and interstate governments are required to collaborate, tearing down trade barriers that unnecessarily hinder global growth and collectively building collaborativeness as a new competitiveness of the world, where every country can benefit. The new mechanism proposed does not imply only promising public policies in each country, but also more confidence and hope in multilateralism to achieve the 20 and 30 goals. For the business and industry community itself, there is a need for a new business model that facilitates a new way of growth where people and planet become part of the achievements. It is crucial to underline our focus here on the term business model, not just goodness model. This means driving change from the core, transcending the superficial level. Brandy, as a multi-level strategy consultancy, has been privileged to be involved in successful transformation of over 350 organizations into sustainable and future-ready catalysts for the positive change. This was all made possible through a comprehensive systematic transformation approach, which allows entity to become ready across 5 areas. So you need to be purpose-ready, engine-ready, impact-ready, culture-ready, and lastly, structure-ready. A prime example of this success is the transformation of one of the region's leading national oil companies into an organization that empowers all toward inclusive growth. Through this, the company distributed wealth and created jobs for communities nationwide through the 80 and 20 model, where the 20% is operated by themselves and the other 80% is driven by their local and SME partners. They also drove the shift from fossil-based to new energy-based, which favors a community growth-based approach without leaving anyone behind. This exemplifies a business who was able to create positive impact and achieve inclusive growth at scale through a fundamental shift of its business model. Considering change along the value chains, this will not be possible if we can't figure out how to shift and educate demand side as well. We are in an age where consumption rather than production defines what is next. In light of this, we need to foster new consumer habits. This transcends only creating awareness, but it goes back to the role of the government, private sector, and civil society, who are responsible for creating a market that favors consumers to shift their behavior from simply buying products to supporting the company, supporting the organizations that are purpose-driven and are championing positive impact. In doing so, we pave a future where our collective choices lead to a truly remarkable and sustainable world. So finally, thank you to all dear panelists for such meaningful discussion outlining how business can be prepared and be an integral part of sustainable future. And thanks again to all of you in the audience for being a part of today's important discussion. Ultimately, the private sector is known to be at the heart of global economy, where we understand its mechanism the best and are most future ready to transformation. By calling a new mechanism, designing new business model, and fostering new consumer habits, we can shape the ecosystem to become strategic fit for the future, to spearhead the greater world ahead. These three news outlined today is an attempt to find a well-balanced solution and identify the private sector's role in tackling ongoing challenges and ensuring delivery of 20 and 30 agenda. I hope it helps capture and conclude all of our aspirations collectively as the business and industry major group for future dialogues, and especially the Summit of the Future. Let's carry these takeaways forward with us and showcase how business is here to listen, is here to speak up, and is here for the greater good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arm. That was very thought-provoking and, as always, very interesting to our audience. So thank you very much once again to our moderators, to our panelists, and to Arm, who did our conclusions. We will be sending out to everyone a recording of the session today, and also some of the notes and the slides. And if you're not a member of the Business and Industry Group, please, if you are a business entity, please contact Dahlia to become a member, because we have a great agenda in pushing forward to the Summit of the Future. So thank you very much. A special thank you to Emily and Dahlia, who are working behind the scenes, and see some of you in a few minutes down at the UN. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you all, and best of success at the UN.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.